emergency was declared due to the elevated levels of lead in children. 60 miles south of us in Detroit, there's a different kind of water crisis, one involving the high utility cost of water. Given your experience and influence behind key federal, climate environmental legislation in the past, how is climate change affecting folks here in Michigan?
Well, thanks for the question. I think that's a good one. Sometimes people are inclined to think of climate change as some sort of distant, sort of hazy, rosy future thing that might happen in the year 2100, and not something that really is affecting their daily lives today. But I think that what we know from the science, and a tremendous amount of science has been done and analyzed and collected together over the last couple of years by the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and by our own National Climate Assessment here in the United States. And they very clearly point out the reality that climate change and its effects on our lives is something that's really very much in the here and now. It's not something that, we obviously worry about the world that we leave for our children and our grandchildren. But the effects of climate change are things that we can see right now. For example, in the Midwest of the United States, we already know that climate change has caused the amount of rainfall that happens sort of at the upper end, when you get a really heavy downpour. The amount of rain that gets deposited, or precipitation that's deposited from heavy downpour now, is 37% more than it was in the late 1950s. So just think about that. If you own a facility, a building, if you're in a low-lying area, you may have built your operations with certain kinds of weather parameters in mind, particularly how much snow might fall in a given snowfall, or how much rain might come down in a torrential downpour. Well, if you were sort of using sort of a past historical background from the 50s and 60s, you'd be off by quite a bit. And in other parts of the United States, the amount of heavy downpours, is up by 70% in the Northeast. So that's something in a very concrete way in which climate change is already affecting life here. Heavy downpours not only affect buildings, they affect agriculture. There are a number of other effects of climate change that affect agriculture in very profound ways too. And Michigan is a big agricultural state. One of the things that can happen, and we're seeing already, is that stable weather patterns that people have relied on in terms of making their plants grow crops, how to manage their operations, aren't so stable anymore. So, for example, in 2012, there was an unseasonable heat wave in very early spring in Michigan, and all the tart cherry trees bloomed too soon. And then when the heat wave was gone, the cold weather came back, and that's a $20 million industry in Michigan, and it took a big hit in 2012. And that kind of climate disruption is just an example of how climate change can really affect the lives of people, not only all over the world, but here in Michigan. And I think Jim Doyle, in his introduction, talked a lot about the kinds of other disruptions that we can have to industrial operations as a result of extreme weather and the kinds of extreme weather that become more common and more intense with climate change. Heavy downpours, extreme heat waves that are more frequent, more intense, and more lasting. And not only, since the economy of Michigan is so tied into the economy of the rest of the world, as Jim pointed out, even climate change weather disruptions in places like Thailand and overseas can really affect business and industry here in Michigan. So, it's a problem that's in here and now, and it's a problem that affects, people's lives, people's businesses, and people's incomes